Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. It's been quite a while since I've talked to folks. Back in February was the last time, I think, maybe. Anyway, yeah, I've been spending a lot of time trying to get back in shape. I put on a little weight over the years, even though I do exercise regularly. So I kind of upped that and um, started lifting weights again and stuff like that. So that's taken up a lot of time and work and uh, arguing with communist so-called leftists. So anyway, tonight I wanted to talk about a very special anniversary in world history. Today is at least um, on Russia time. Today is the 80th anniversary of the Soviet defeat of Nazi Germany. The Nazis surrendered uh, late on May 8th, 1945, and it was May 9th on Moscow time at that time. So the Soviet Union and then now Russia celebrate that victory over Nazi Germany on May 9th. They have a big parade every year. And it's a national holiday. It's a really big deal for obvious reasons because uh, and I'll talk about some more details about this in a few minutes. But yeah, basically, what it boils down to is that uh, the Soviet Union did more to defeat fascism than any other country. The United States, Britain, you name it, they did not do nearly as much to defeat the Nazis as the Soviet Union did. The Soviets lost about 27 million people, about 12 million troops and 15 million civilians in the Great Patriotic War, as they call it. China also played a major role in the defeat of fascism, also not recognized for it, but they along with the United States and certainly other countries also played an important role in defeating the other Axis powers, Germany and Italy. But in any case, uh, particularly the Soviet role is very often downplayed in the West. Um, so what I wanted to do tonight was talk in a little more detail about what that role was, as well as how it's been downplayed, and talk some about this particular year's celebration. Um, so let's see here. So the Russian media just released a video showing all the foreign leaders arriving in Moscow. Let's have a look at that. Uh, I think it was 29 foreign leaders. Most of them heads of state uh, were in Moscow for the Victory Day parade. There's Lula from Brazil. Uh, and that's the Serbian leader, I believe. The previous one was someone from Africa, I forget. Um,
В нашей стране эта война называется Великой Отечественной, потому что
okay,
весь народ, без
I mean,
всякого
maybe an English
преувеличения,
translation,
принял
but
участие в отражении нацистской
no.
агрессии.
Let's have a look at something else, actually. So among those welcomed were Xi Jinping, president of China, Lula da Silva, president of Brazil, Tokayev, I forget where he's from, Vucic from Serbia, Diaz-Canel, president of Cuba, Abbas from Palestine, Lukashenko from Belarus, Ming Hong. I'm not sure. Is that North Korea? I'm not sure. A representative from an Asian country, and Nicolas Maduro, of course, is the president of Venezuela. And altogether, there were 29 people from countries all around, mostly the global South, who came to Moscow for the parade. Notably, nobody from Western Europe came. Certainly Donald Trump didn't go, or any representative from the U.S. Nobody from Canada came. So quite a different perspective on these events in the West versus really most of the world. Let's see. Vietnam is another country that sent a representative. I guess that was Burkina Faso's president that was in the video. Slovakia was the only EU country to appear on the list of attendees. And the EU's representative for foreign affairs, Kaja Kallas, implied that there would be, quote, consequences for European officials participating in the event. Her threats marked the latest episode in a long-standing campaign of historical revisionism led by the EU, aimed at minimizing and obscuring the Soviet Union's role in the liberation of Europe in World War II. This article is from People's Dispatch, which is a publication of, I forget what group, but anyway, it's generally pretty good. So I thought this was kind of a hilarious Western dipshit perspective. Yulia Mendel, some Ukrainian woman who is a graduate of the University of Michigan, is at the University of Michigan, the Wallace House Center for Journalism at the University of Michigan. So she said, Putin has radically reimagined the meaning of this parade. Once a commemoration of victory over fascism in World War II, it is no longer about the past. Oh, really? Interesting. Today it stands as a symbol of his vision for the future. Troops from China, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, and other nations, countries with little historical connection to World War II, now march in Moscow together. Well, if you know anything about the history of World War II, I'm sure you got a good laugh out of that because, of course, China lost 20 million people in World War II, second only to Russia, because Japan occupied a large portion of China. Japan also occupied Vietnam during World War II. And you dumbass, Yulia, however you say her name, Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, these people are just so ignorant, and it's really a commentary on the pathetic historical education we get in the West about World War II and pretty much anything else that that really is very telling about that. And certainly, I remember when I was in school, the emphasis as far as World War II in our history classes was concerned was on things like D-Day, the battle with Japan, and just aspects of how the United States was involved in World War II, and really downplaying the role of Russia or the Soviet Union in the defeat of the Nazis. How about you guys? Did you get much education in school about the actual history of World War II? Because I know I really didn't. Yeah. I thought there was just a funny little exchange on the Hill show Rising. Ryan Grimm, I've criticized him a lot for various things in the past, like his failure to support uh, force the vote, the tactic designed to pressure for a vote on Medicare for all in Congress. But he's since then he had a lot of good takes about various things, and this is an interesting commentary he makes about World War II and the Russian role in it, and his co-host Emily Shinsky, I think is her name, doesn't have a clue, and so it's kind of funny. Let's have a look.
You could throw a dart anywhere at the global map, and you can probably find, at some point throughout the 20th century, the U.S. intervening to undermine, some type of social democratic effort and backing the most vicious right-wing elements. And the irony of them calling this anti-Semitism when the U.S. very consciously and explicitly out of World War II allied itself with former Nazis, helped Nazis escape justice, was complicit in what was called the rat line, with getting Nazis out of Germany and into these death squads that were run by the United States and deployed in an anti-communist fashion against the Soviet Union and against leftist elements in South America.
But who ended the?
I've seen estimates of something like 10,000 Nazis were helped to escape justice by the U.S. after World War II, and as Ryan said, a great many of them were involved in political repression and coups and so forth on behalf of right-wing forces, actually in Ukraine. Which, of course, was part of the Soviet Union at the time, but also had a strong Nazi element. They, that group of Nazis in Ukraine, which played a major role in the Holocaust, slaughtered over 1 million people in collaboration with the German Nazis. But they fomented an uprising against the Soviet Union there in Ukraine that took the lives of tens of thousands of people. But anyway, well, let's go back to this and see how Emily, in her ignorant way, pushes back against what Ryan is saying here.
Against the Soviet Union and against leftist elements in South America.
But who ended the Holocaust? I mean, what country?
The Soviet Union, actually.
Well, okay, but
I mean, the Soviet Union did that.
no, I mean, the
We
Soviet
walked
Union,
in after the Russians had suffered what 20+ million casualties and marched into Germany.
sure, but without the United States' intervention, a heck of a lot more people would have died in that atrocity.
Yes, and I'm glad the Soviet Union and the United States allied to beat Nazi Germany, but the Nazi Germany, the Nazis themselves then allied with the United States to go after the Soviet Union and to go after communist and social democratic elements in South America. That's an actual part of the history.
Right, but again, there's lives being saved in that process, a lot of lives being saved in that process, and a lot of Americans putting their lives on the line and dying to save those lives.
Sure, but many fewer than Soviet lives died to take on the Nazis.
So it was about 400,000 Americans American soldiers who died in World War II. I think most of them died fighting Japan. And in comparison, 12 million Russian or Soviet troops. So 30 times as many troops, and like what would it be? Almost 100 times as many people overall from the Soviet Union died in World War II than did Americans. Anyway, so a product of our fine American education system right there. Well, let's have a look at some commentaries about this historical revisionism that we're talking about, and then we can have a look at an article that summarizes in some detail what the actual role of the Soviet Union was, and talks about the historical illiteracy that's so prevalent in the West. Here's what George Galloway had to say about these things.
They're excluding Russia from World War II commemorations. This is the 80th anniversary of a war. I mean, Donald Trump.
Yeah, of course, Victory Day, which is called something else in the West, is celebrated on May 8th because it was May 8th at the time that the Nazis surrendered. So there were celebrations, yesterday in Europe, and nobody from Russia was invited. They didn't really talk about Russia or the Soviet Union and their role in World War II. And as I just mentioned, a top EU official threatened to punish EU member states that sent someone to Moscow to participate in the Victory Day events. So anyway, let George continue here.
Made a statement this week in which he says that America won both world wars. They won the First World War, even though they were only in it about 12 months. They won the Second World War, even though their contribution to the defeat of Hitler was valuable and gallant and noble, but small by comparison with the contribution made by the Red Army of the then USSR. Trump should refrain from these kind of insults, because every single person in Russia today and in the wider former Soviet Union lost somebody in that war. And many of them will be on the streets this week with the photographs, the portraits of their grandparents and parents who gave their lives in that war. 27 million of them, 12 million of them soldiers and the others, civilians, in the death and destruction that you tabulated there so well. If not for Russia, you and I would be speaking tonight in German. That's the truth of it. Except we wouldn't be speaking because there would be no freedom at all. And for a variety of reasons, both you and I would be at best in a concentration camp and at worst incinerated and dead.
So yeah, he's right. And without the Soviet Union, it's highly doubtful that the Axis powers would have been defeated in World War II. Let's see here. Sorry. Here's the Cuban president. Gosh, I've been blanking on his first name, Diaz-Canel. Talking about the historical revisionism of the West regarding the role of the Soviet Union in the defeat of the Nazis, and also talks about how what some people have called the Fourth Reich, the current Western imperialist alliance of NATO is expanding nowadays, and Russia has led the resistance to that. So let's have a look. Oh shoot! I'm sorry. I'll start this over because I forgot to uh, share this tab before I started it. And I'm sure you would rather see the translation than only hear him speaking in Spanish. So let me start that again.
Está en la respuesta. Yo creo que tenemos que una vez más entonces potenciar esa convicción de que hay que ir a la historia, que tenemos que salvar la memoria histórica, que la memoria histórica es vital. Por lo tanto, no nos podemos quedar quietos. Yo creo que hay que partir de profundizar en la educación en todo el mundo, desde el conocimiento de la historia, de esa historia universal y de esa historia vista desde las ópticas de cada uno de los países, pero asumiendo un pensamiento crítico. Cuando no hay un pensamiento crítico, lo que te ponen en una serie de Netflix, lo que te ponen en una película de Hollywood, lo que viene en un libro desde Occidente, no te permite entonces separar la mentira, separar la calumnia, separar la manipulación. En aquella época la respuesta la dio la Unión Soviética. No rendirse, luchar heroicamente y vencer. Cuba ha dado una respuesta. Más de 65 años de bloqueo recrudecido en estos tiempos y no renunciamos a nuestras convicciones. Rusia ha enfrentado con dignidad y con una respuesta propia los afanes expansionistas y de injerencia de la OTAN, y ha también enfrentado con una estabilidad política y económica tremenda en el país.
So that was Miguel Diaz-Canel, the president of Cuba, warning against the historical revisionism of Hollywood and Western media and culture in general about what happened in World War II. And in the so-called free country of Germany, there is actually a ban on flying Soviet or Russian flags, and it's also illegal to have commemorations of the victory over the Nazis that emphasize the Soviet contribution. But what all exactly happened? The interesting thing is that back then, right after World War II, um, it was so obvious that they couldn't pull the wool over anybody's eyes about the fact that the Soviet Union contributed by far the most to defeating uh, Nazi Germany in World War II, as Ben Norton points out in this article from a while back. Um, so Ben, the founder of Geopolitical Economy Report, formerly with the Gray Zone, says, while the USSR played by far the biggest role in destroying Nazism, the Third Reich received support from major U.S. corporations such as Chase Bank, Standard Oil, IBM, Ford, GM, Coca-Cola, and Kodak, which helped Adolf Hitler carry out the Holocaust, along with companies for which U.S. Senator Prescott Bush, father of former President George H.W. Bush, was a director and key shareholder. So, I already talked about the huge discrepancy between the number of Americans and a similar number of Britons who were killed in World War II versus the many millions of Russian and other Soviet citizens who lost their lives. I mean, it was literally the Red Army that liberated Auschwitz, although the Auschwitz Memorial Foundation denies that. And the Red Army also liberated Berlin. You saw in the thumbnail that I posted for this video the famous photo of a Soviet soldier raising the red flag in Berlin. Every January 27th, International Holocaust Remembrance Day is held. And that's the day in 1945 when the Soviet Union freed the prisoners in Auschwitz. And the Auschwitz Foundation doesn't invite any Soviet representatives to this commemoration. Just to delve into details about how markedly disproportionate the role of the Soviet Union was in confronting the Nazis, Ben points out here that between the evacuation of Crete in 1941 and the Allied invasion of Italy in 1943, Russian troops were the only ones to fight German forces on European soil. I didn't even know that. I mean, literally, there was basically no combat on the Western Front until 1943, or no confrontation with German troops at any rate. Of the 13.6 million German soldiers who were killed, wounded, or captured during the Second World War, during the Second World War, 10 million were killed, wounded, or captured on the Eastern Front, i.e., fighting against the Soviet Union. Peter Kuznick, associate professor of history at American University, pointed out that throughout most of World War II, the United States and the British were fighting 10 German divisions combined. The Soviets were fighting 200. That is to say, the Soviets fought 20 times more Nazis than the Americans and British combined. And even Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain during World War II, and a leader, of course, of the British Empire, the colonial empire that that Britain held until World War II. Who it was, of course, very anti-communist, as all Western leaders are. Praised Mussolini and he had kind of mixed views on Hitler, but even he was forced to admit that it is the Red Army that has torn the guts out of the filthy Nazis, as he put it. But since Churchill's time, many Western anti-communist intellectuals have tried to rewrite history to erase the enormous contribution made by the Soviets with a great deal of success. So, whereas in 1945, 57% of French people polled agreed that the USSR was the nation that contributed the most to the defeat of Germany, by 2004, only 20% said the Soviet Union played the leading role, while 58% of French people believed that the US did the most. Now, it's not certainly, we wouldn't want to minimize the American contribution to the defeat of the Nazis, even though they didn't completely defeat them, but kind of saved the ass of many of them after World War II. But the U.S. sent a lot of military aid to the Soviet Union, and certainly many Americans fought valiantly against the Nazis, hundreds of thousands. But even the New York Times, terrible a journalistic outlet as it is, has at times acknowledged the importance of the Soviet role. They say, for instance, military historians have always known that the main scene of the Nazis' downfall was the Eastern Front, which claimed 80% of all German military casualties in the war. But that's kind of a minority opinion in the West, probably even at the New York Times. So a lot of anti-communist propagandists depict the USSR and Nazi Germany as allies, citing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939 between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, which kind of delayed the German invasion of the Soviet Union for a while, which Stalin and the Russian leadership generally knew was going to happen eventually. But then these folks who leave no stone unturned in bashing the Soviet Union omit the agreement that Great Britain and France signed with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy in September 1938, or the agreement that they made with Nazi Germany in 1933. They nearly always fail to mention the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935, the German-Polish Non-Aggression Pact of 1934, or the German-Estonian Non-Aggression Pact and German-Latvian Non-Aggression Pact of June 1939, among others. In fact, it was the Western capitalist powers that sought to appease Germany and Italy. They had hoped that the fascist regimes would focus their attention on waging war against the Soviet Union. Of course, as you probably are aware, the West launched an invasion of the Soviet Union, and I think Japan was also involved. I forget who else. Almost 20 countries invaded the Soviet Union, or revolutionary Russia, I guess, in 1918. And tried to overthrow the new Bolshevik government, and so naturally, they still wanted the Soviet government to be overthrown a couple of decades later. And the Soviets, for their part, were trying to develop a military alliance prior to Germany launching the war by invading Poland. But at first, the Soviet Union had asked Britain and France to join in an anti-Nazi alliance and invade Germany and overthrow Hitler's government in August of 1939. But they weren't interested. So a week later, Moscow, the Bolsheviks signed that agreement with Nazi Germany. And immediately after signing this, Soviet Union began producing. Well, they have started before this, but they upped their production of tanks and guns and ammunition, preparing for war with the with the Nazis, who they knew were going to invade eventually. And part of the preparations that the Soviet Union made for that invasion was that they actually, bit by bit, disassembled factories in the western part of the Soviet Union, weapons factories, and rebuilt them east of the Ural Mountains, so out of reach of any potential Nazi invasion. Just an enormous project, and I can't imagine the U.S. government being able to pull off something like that. So, a week after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, and 2 weeks after the Soviets had tried in vain to get Britain and France to ally with them, the Nazis invaded Poland, and World War II, and the West was underway. It had already begun in Asia, a couple of years before that. Okay. So yeah, if Britain and France had not refused to ally immediately with the Soviet Union and attack Nazi Germany, um, they might have been strangled in the crib before that regime might have been strangled in the crib before they launched their invasion of Poland and everywhere else, and before they began the Holocaust in earnest. But that's not what happened. So anyway, and finally, here's an interesting article by a resident of the former Yugoslavia, which not many people are aware. I wasn't really aware of this myself. Also played a major role in defeating fascism, and there were communist parties and groups throughout Europe who battled Nazis, and that was certainly the case in Yugoslavia, where about 1 million people died fighting the Nazis. But Macedonia and other former Yugoslav territories have been under a lot of pressure from the West to not celebrate May 9th as the day of victory over fascism. And May 9th, Victory Day, has been rebranded as Europe Day. And he goes on to say younger generations really know very little or nothing about Yugoslavia's enormous sacrifice in the struggle against Nazi Germany. So he goes on to say, through its entire state-building apparatus, the EU seeks to rewrite history and implant it in the minds of new generations. In that version of history, any connection to the brutal colonial past is erased. More importantly, a veil is drawn over the fact that Europe's imperial ambitions led to 2 world wars. The Second World War, whose anniversary we now mark quietly, even clandestinely, behind the EU's back here in Macedonia, was the anticlimax of capitalism, its degeneration into Nazism and fascism. This was not merely the result of individuals like Hitler or Mussolini, but of structural conditions that emerged from the womb of the post-World War I capitalist crisis. And I should add to that, not many people know about this, but there was actually an attempt to organize a fascist coup against Roosevelt here in the United States, which many wealthy people, many oligarchs in the United States from both major political parties, the Democrats as well as the Republicans, were involved in that plot, which fortunately was defeated, but fascist sympathies were very real in the U.S. ruling class, and still are, obviously. The U.S. and most European countries, Canada, etc., are supporting the fascist regime of Ukraine right now, as well as the fascist regime committing genocide in Palestine, the Israelis. So, fascism is not something that's a product of individuals like Hitler or Mussolini, even though certainly they had a fascist mindset. It's basically a tool that the ruling class uses when they can't find any other way to contain working class rebellion. And so you saw that in the 1920s and 1930s because capitalism was in severe crisis after World War I, and there was a major working class rebellion as country after country struggled economically here in the United States as well as throughout Europe. And so most every European country had a significant fascist movement as well as a significant workers' movement. So one final thing from this Yugoslav, I'm not sure if that's a man or a woman, Biljana? Anyway, they say the rehabilitation of fascism began with its erasure from memory, and then came the glorification of the Euromaidan in Ukraine, the so-called pro-European revolution of 2014. A strange amnesia is spreading through the so-called Western world. May 9th was kidnapped, and with it, textbooks, symbolic acts, and commemorations were gradually stripped of any connection to the true military victors of World War II, the Red Army and the Soviet people, who sacrificed more than 27 million lives, and the Yugoslavs sacrificed more than 1 million. It was the Soviets who liberated Berlin. Commemoration and historical memory matter, but just as vital is the ability to see with eyes wide open that the serpent's egg still lives and could hatch again into what millions across the world gave their lives to defeat 80 years ago. The bitter truth is that fascism was never fully defeated, except on the battlefield in 1945. The social scientists know well that the roots of fascism cannot be destroyed by arms alone. In some states, we now see historical revisionism and even glorification of local fascists or Nazi collaborators. That is why the Russian initiative at the United Nations is significant. And what they're referring to there is that every year Russia introduces a resolution at the UN calling for nations to combat the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. This past one in December last year was co-sponsored by 39 states and received 119 votes in favor of this resolution against glorifying Nazism or fascism. But 53 countries voted against it. And you can guess who a lot of them were. Of course, Ukraine, the US, UK, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Norway, Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Japan, Canada, the usual suspects of the imperialist West and their imperialist Eastern allies like Japan. As Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov put it, supposedly, after World War II, he said, "We have liberated Europe from fascism, but they will never forgive us for it." And that, I think, kind of sums it up. At best, imperialist nations have an ambivalent attitude toward Nazism and fascism. They have it as a ready tool standing by for whenever they face a crisis that they can't, a working class rebellion that they can't put down by other means. Fascism is a tool in their toolkit, and they use it consistently throughout the global South. They're using it in Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia right now, and of course, Israel is a fascist state currently committing genocide. So when the Democrats here in the United States, Bernie Sanders and AOC and so on and so forth, say that they're fighting fascism, and how important it is to beat back the fascist Donald Trump. Don't believe them. They support fascism. They support it in Ukraine. They support it in Israel. They support it in many places throughout the world. They'll support it here if they have to. And that's just kind of the way it is. Potential support for fascism by the ruling class just kind of goes hand in glove with capitalism. All right, well, that's all I wanted to say about this commemoration of the Soviet Union's defeat of the Nazis. Thank you for listening, and take care, everybody. I will see you next time. Please like, share, and subscribe. Talk to you soon.